Hello kids, welcome to the session at Learn Forward platform by FeatherCap. I am your English facilitator Karima Singh to make your learning easy and fun. So let's begin. Hope you all are ready with your books Fly High Class 4, and now we are on the chapter 8 that says the Himalayas, roof of the world. I'm pretty sure that you all must have heard about the Himalayas, right? So we'll be reading about it. This story is about Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, who were the first two men to climb the Mount Everest. Let's read the story to find out how they climbed and how they reached the highest peak of the world, that is the Mount Everest. So Mount Everest, it is the highest peak, right? And before we start the story, we have a small activity. Here we have they have given some activities and we need to identify and name them as per the activity, and we have a help box. So first one I'll do it for you. It is car racing. So next you'll all do it on your own. All right, so let's start. The Himalayas are a wonderful line of mountains. The mountains are huge, steep. Steep is, slopey, almost perpendicular. It is like, steep is like this. Khadi chadhai jisko bolte hain, right? So it is straight. And Snow White. If you see them, you will never forget their beauty. Sometimes we call the Himalayas the roof of the world because they are the highest mountains on the earth. So being the highest mountain on the earth, they are called the roof of the world. For many years, Sherpa traders carried rice and salt through the mountain passes, but most people did not try to cross the Himalayas. Definitely, it was really difficult to reach that height. For a long time, no one knew which was the highest mountain of all because nobody could reach that point, so nobody knew about it. In 1852, the Survey of India measured the height of the mountains. It found that Mount Everest was the highest mountain in the world. So in 1852, there was a survey carried out, and in that only they got to know that Mount Everest is the highest peak in the world, highest mountain in the world. But it was only in 1952 that Survey of India found the exact height of the mountain. So 1852 it started, but in 1952 they could find out the exact height of the mountain. At the summit of Mount Everest, summit is the top point, right? The top of the mountain, the peak. There are two peaks. The south peak that rises 28,700 feet and the Everest rises to 29028 feet. So, at the top of the this Mount Everest, there are two peaks. First is the South Peak and then the South Peak that rises up to 28,700 feet, and then is the Everest that rises to 29028 feet. Many people tried to climb Mount Everest. They wanted to stand at the top of the world, but climbing such a high mountain is not easy. You all agree, It happens that when we go to hill station, when we reach certain height, it is not possible for us to be normal. Our breathing is affected, right? Then we start panting also, we deep breathe and saas phulna is panting. Okay, the mountain, okay, at the summit the earth's atmosphere is very thin. So at the top of the mountain, the earth atmosphere is very thin, there is less air to breathe, and there are very strong, and it is extremely cold. Definitely, higher you go, lower the oxygen level and more cold it is. In 1953, two men joined an expedition. So what is an expedition? A group of people who set out to journey, usually very dangerous. All right, so it's not an easy task. It is not an adventure, it is an expedition. To climb Mount Everest, they came from two different countries and they spoke two different languages, but they both wanted to do the same thing. They belonged to different countries. They were, not familiar of each other's language, but both of them had the same mission, and that was to reach at the top of the Mount Everest. They both wanted to be the first people to climb the world's highest mountain. They wanted to climb to the summit of the Mount Everest, to the top of the Mount Everest. Edmund Hillary came from New Zealand. At home, he kept bees and sold honey. So Edmund Hillary, he was from New Zealand, and what he used to do, he used to keep the bees, and then, the honey that he could extract from them, he used to sell that. But more than anything else, he loved climbing high mountains. Tenzing Norgay, he came from Nepal, and his family were Sherpas, who were well known for their skill at climbing mountains. When he was a young boy, Tenzing ran away from his home near Mount Everest and wanted to live in Darjeeling. But soon he came back and he began to help team of climbers. So he belonged to a background, where the people in the family, they already, were into that climbing of mountains. So, when he was a young boy, he just ran away from his home and he went to live in Darjeeling. But then he came back and he started helping those people who were, into climbing. In May 1953, their team set out to climb Mount Everest. So they started their expedition in 1953. They wore very warm clothes, special boots which do not slip on the ice. They carried air containers on their backs to help them breathe. So they also carried the oxygen cylinders. After a few days, the team reached a camp high on the mountainside, while the rest of the team stayed at the camp. So after a few days, they were able to reach a camp they were able to reach on the high on the mountainside, and the rest of the team, they stayed at the camp. Hillary and Norgay continued towards the summit, but when they were resting, but both of them, they continued. When they reached 27900 feet, they put up a tent for the night. So when they reached this much height, they planned to put up a tent and spend the night there. They could not sleep. The wind howled and pulled at their tent. Howl is, it blew hard, making a loud sound. Whenever we have storms, you must have heard that sound, right? So that is howling. And it pulled the tent. It was bitterly cold, but above all, they were excited because they were really determined, right? They lay awake and wondered whether they would be the first two men to reach the Mount Everest. Early the next morning, the two men climbed up towards the summit. So they climbed towards the summit. They passed South Peak, and after South Peak was the Mount Everest. And at last, at 11:30 in the morning, they reached the peak of the Mount Everest. They were overjoyed, very happy. They were the first men to stand on the top of the world. So they were able to accomplish their task. They were able to fulfill their dream. They stayed at the summit for 15 minutes, took photographs and ate mint cake. Then they climbed slowly and carefully back down to their tent. The two men became famous. They both wrote books about their adventure. Tenzing lived in Darjeeling, where he trained people to climb mountains, and Edmund went back to the Himalayas many times. Today, with modern equipment are the tools, and with the help of Sherpa guides, climbing Mount Everest is not as difficult as it was in 1952. Why? Because, they were the ones who experienced it. Now, when they experienced it, they, made it comfortable for other people. Each year, teams of climbers try to reach the summit. Thousands of people have tried to climb, but only a few hundred have been successful. Mount Everest is a very beautiful mountain, but it is also very dangerous. The weather can change quickly. Sometimes climbers get lost or they slip on the ice and they fall because ice is slippery. Many climbers have died on the mountain. In the past, Mount Everest were a very clean place, but many mountaineers throw litter on the mountainside. Now, some parts of the Mount Everest are dirty because of people who had been littering. Climbers often leave empty cans, pieces of tent, and air containers lying on the ground. So this makes the area dirty. Nowadays, there are rules for mountain climbers. They have to bring all empty cans, bottles back with them. So that's really great. Some teams of climbers are trying to clean up the mountain. In 1995, one team collected 560 grams of litter and carried it down to the bottom of the mountain. These climbers wanted to show others that the world's highest mountain should be kept clean and free from litter. So great action taken by them. So this was an inspiring story. Hope you all loved it. So now let's start the exercise. Which of the following words means the same as well known? So it is famous. Absolutely correct. Which of the following words is the correctly spelled? So we need to identify the correct spelling of containers. So which option? Option C. Now we have the extract. Based on it, we need to answer the questions. The first, what are the Himalayas called? So what are the Himalayas called? They are called the roof of the world. Dash are a wonderful line of mountains. So what are the wonderful line of mountains? Himalayas. The mountains are dash, steep and snow white. The mountains are huge. They are really big. The Himalayas are not the highest mountains on the earth, false. They are the highest mountains. Next extract. In 1953, how many people joined an expedition to climb the Mount Everest? So there were 2 people. They wanted to climb up to the summit of the Mount Everest, the highest point, the topmost point. Who came from New Zealand? Edmund Hillary came from New Zealand, and Tenzing, he belonged to Nepal. Tenzing, Norway, kept bees and sold honey, right? False, because it was not Tenzing, it was Hillary, Edmund Hillary, who used to keep the bees and then used to sell honey. Now, we have to take mark the correct option. When did the exact of Mount Everest find? When did the exact height of Mount Everest? It should be, when was the exact height of the Mount Everest found? So it was in 1953. Though the Survey of India started in 1852, but then finally in 1952, we were able to find out the exact height. When did the 2 men join an expedition to climb the Mount Everest? It was in 1953. Who came from Nepal? It was Tenzing. Very good. How many kilograms of litter was collected? It was 560 kilograms of litter was collected. In the year, I think it was 1995. Now fill in the blanks. For many years, dash traders carried rice and through the mountain passes. So they were the Sherpa and they carried rice and salt. The Everest rises to 29028. So this is the Everest peak, and one was the South Peak. When Hillary and Norgay reached 27990 feet, they put up a tent for the night and planned to stay there. They reached the peak of the Mount Everest at 11:30 a.m. in the morning. Now we need to identify the correct statements. The South Peak rises to 28700 feet. Absolutely correct. Edmund Hillary kept bees and sold honey. True. They stayed at the summit for 17 minutes. No, it was only for 15 minutes. So it's a false statement. They stayed there for 15 minutes. Tenzing went back to the Himalayas many times. No, false. He went back to Nepal and he used to help the climbers. Whereas Edmund Hillary, he went to Himalayas many times. Now we have the question answers. Why did the 2 men join an expedition to climb the Mount Everest? Because they wanted to be the first one to reach the top of the Mount Everest. Who were the first men to climb the summit to the Mount Everest? It was Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. Why do we call the Himalayas the roof of the world? So why it is called the roof of the world? Because they are the highest mountains in the world. Why is it difficult to climb Mount Everest? So why do you feel it is difficult to climb Mount Everest? Because it is, very high. The oxygen level, it gets, the oxygen level decreases and it gets cold as you reach the top. And, it is difficult to walk. We might skid and, we might slip also. So it is difficult because it is really high. Describe the events of May 1953 in 4 to 5 sentences. So 1953, the expedition started wherein two people, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, they started their expedition to climb the Mount Everest. Then in May 1953, their team set out to climb Mount Everest. They wore very warm clothes and special boots which would not slip on ice. They carried air containers, the oxygen cylinders, because the oxygen level is not that good. So that would help in breathing. After a few days, the team reached a camp on the high side, and finally the 2 men, that is Tenzing and Edmund, they were able to reach the peak at 11:30 in the morning. So they were overjoyed and they were really happy as they had really fulfilled their task and mission. So that was all about the story. Hope you all loved it. It's an inspiring one. So read the story once again, go through the exercise. See you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Happy learning.